Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker, shills, death slayers, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And as long as we're talking about banker scum around the globe, of course, we have to talk about Italy's banks. And as I mentioned before, I did a video several months back talking about the implosion in Italy's banks and how more bailouts are coming or bail-ins. And in fact, in Italy, one of the things they're trying to do is avoid a bail-in, even though those are some of the new rules that they made that bailouts would not happen. So now we find ourselves in a situation where there are big banks like Deutsche Bank and this bank in Italy and banks in Spain and elsewhere that need to be bailed out. And they really can't risk bail-ins at this point. And but we may see those as well. But anyway, now we have Italy's third largest bank and also the oldest bank in the world, founded in 1472, the Banco Monte dei Paschi. And as of mid 2014, they've pretty much been on their deathbed and are worthless. And in total, Italian banks have a huge problem: 360 billion euros in non-performing loans, and only half of them written down. And of course, since we know those are fudge numbers, we know the numbers are actually much worse than that. So they came up with this plan to bail out Banco Monte dei Paschi yet again. They've been rescued twice since 2014 already, and now the new plan is called the Atlas plan. It's already failing. Its idea is somehow leverage 5 billion euros to cover 200 billion euro hole in the banking system. And of course, the bad bank plan that they used in Spain has so far been rejected. And Italy wanted to use the Brexit turmoil to secure EU approval for Italy's plans to recapitalize the banks without triggering bail-ins, and Germany refused. So now they're struggling with the complexities of rules needed for a banking union across the eurozone. And we find that each country has its own set of problems when dealing with these eurozone rules. So anyway, over 600 Italian banks could be affected in the long run with this, what's going on here. So we have this collapsing bank. One side story that goes along with this is that banks like J.P. Morgan are going to be involved in any of these rescues, and $250 million in underwriting fees set up for the likes of J.P. Morgan. And in fact, UBS already made 434 million euros off in service fees off the last couple of bailouts, and now JP Morgan's lining up to set up a special purpose vehicle that would give JP Morgan and other banks another $300 million dollars, or euros in fees. And so one of the reasons why they're having a problem dealing with this bank and the potential bail-in / bailouts, because thousands of small depositors were wiped out at 4 regional banks late last year. 100,000 retail investors were hurt by these bail-ins, and then we have more pressure on Italian banks because of the Brexit. And so they came up with not only the new plan for this 5 billion euros in this Atlas plan, but also this another idea to inject 44 billion euros into the banks and set up all kinds of new special vehicles. And so anyway, it's all been doomed to failure so far, and every plan they come up with is not enough to deal with the size of the problem. You have 720 billion euros in non-performing loans across the eurozone, and 500 billion euros of that are just in the peripherally in places like Portugal and Greece and Italy and like. And they want to. Italy is just trying to avoid the political consequences of actually having to do further bail-ins after the results of the last ones. And then also the contagion. International banks have lent 550 billion euros to Italy's banks, and 791 billion euros in government debt. Italian government debt has been bought by other euro banks. And in fact, you look at the breakdown, France has 250 billion euros of Italian debt in the French banks. There's 83 billion euros of Italian debt in German banks. Deutsche Bank alone has 12 billion euros of exposure. So that's something to factor in the video I did about Deutsche Bank. There's 44 billion euros of Italian debt in Spanish banks, 42 billion euros of Italian debt in U.S. banks, 29 billion euros of Italian debt in UK banks, and 27 billion euros of Italian debt in Japanese bank. And let's remember that Italy is the third largest eurozone country, and it could be a gargantuan problem if their banks do implode and there's a contagion. Their government debt is second only to Greece at 130% of GDP, so they've got a lot of problems to sort out. And as I bring up in this video about Italy and the one I did about Spain recently, and all the ones I've done about broke-ass eurozone banks, the big picture is it's a problem across the eurozone, and that's why we have to look at each of these banking problems. The newest one in Spain, the one in Italy, and the other ones we've seen because of the potential of contagion because the banks are weak all across the eurozone. A new study came out and says that EU banks could require another 900 billion euros in order to shore up their balance sheets. And there's also been a new IMF report that says that even if eurozone countries had robust economies right now, they would not be able to get out of these problems, and their banks would still be suffering. So a lot of dire warnings out there. The amount of shortfall was revealed by stress tests recently, and in 2014 they did stress tests, and 130 banks theoretically needed 25 billion euros, and yet here it is 2 years later, and theoretically they need 900 billion euros. It's really quite an exponential jump, and shows just how bad things are. I don't know if banks are acknowledging more of their weaknesses. I suspect the number must be that much higher, considering the fact that all these banks are cooking their books and lying about their numbers and their exposures. So anyway, there's a look at Italian banks right now. Like I say, their bank shares are plunging. They're trying all kinds of new devices and new ways to circumvent their own rules, and then also being a cash cow for, of course, all the predatory banks on Wall Street or to make money off of all these banking problems in Europe. That's just the way it goes. And so there we have it, Bankerpalooza 2016. A look at banker scum around the world. And Italy's got their banker scum as well. Stay tuned to more videos about banker scum in other areas of the world as long as I'm on a roll. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.